Well, hi everyone. I'm just setting up to make sure I have sound. Let's see if you can hear me. Okay, do you guys hear me okay out there in view?
Okay, do you guys hear me okay out there in view?
Okay, I can hear you loud and clear. Just getting ready to go. All right. Hi everyone. Welcome to my Thursday author narration stream, Faery with Teeth, book 1 of the Faery-Chronicles. And here I am in Palea on my mount and enjoying this environment for a change instead of the Elder Scrolls Online. So I've been having a lot of fun in this game. Whoops. Except I can't ride a horse worth beans. But I'm taking you up here to the hilltop because I want to show you something pretty spectacular. This is my land, and it's the Misty Heatherland or something like that. It's a new land that just recently came out. I'm just trotting around it so you can see it. But up here, there is a rock incline. I'm going to try and get up there somewhere. I'll climb right here. But it is a stone circle. How cool is that, right? I have a stone circle on my land made out of white stone. And when you come into the interior of it, there's a second stone circle. And when you come into the interior of that, there is a third stone circle. And it's heather. Isn't that gorgeous? So I figured I'll start off reading here. And enjoy. So we're reading book 1 of the Faery-Chronicles. It's an ongoing process, of course. Author narration. I'm Kisma, and we stopped on page 224 with the chapter Blocked. Here we go. Sean McDowell hoisted himself to his feet. The hill was moving with the force. He could smell it in the wind, taste the stench on his lips. He looked down at the stained earth. The blood had soaked in. He kicked dirt over the stain and recapped the empty container before heading for the back door. Inside, the phone was ringing. He set the container in the sink and made his way to the phone. "Sean here," he said into the receiver. "Right then," he said after a pause and hung up. He clicked his teeth, grinning. Well, if she wouldn't willingly meet him at the lock, he'd force it. Best get over to Riley's pub and wait. She was sure to go there and call him, since that was the nearest payphone. A gust of wind shook the house. Her scent wafted through the air. It reeked of power, of knowing. He jerked toward the open window. She was on the path, standing near the castle, and she knew. She knew. "Make haste, old fool," he grumbled, grabbing the keys and making for the front door, "lest you miss her, and now wouldn't that be a pity for her?" Cian leaned against his hazel staff, a cocky expression on his face. Vivian was going to love this one. He expected her to be just about at the snapping point. He eyed the freshly mended gate. Now the fence would be easy enough to climb over, or to help anyone get over if need be. Donna rounded the curve, but there was no way he could lift her over. "My 57 Stingray is in mint condition," Steve chattered on. "Is that so?" Cian absent-mindedly commented. He fingered his goatee. "Let's wait here for Vivian." "You'd love my mother's 38 Bentley, black with tan interior, excellent condition. A true classic." Ken and Ellen eyed each other. "Idiot," Ken whispered in his wife's ear. "We should shut the fuck up." "Right," agreed Ellen. "When my mother was involved with MGM Studios back in the early 50s, she owned a classic Rolls Royce and would drive it to her house in Palm Springs nearly every weekend. Of course, we didn't drive. Jim Townsend, her chauffeur, did. Now he was a piece of work." Cian glanced at the man, nodded his head, and peered back down the path. Ellen patted Ken's arm as he gritted his teeth. She met Marcella's gaze and returned a tense smile. "Now, dear," Marcella said, moving to Steve's side, "I'm sure no one's interested in cars at this particular moment." Rose and Shelby grinned at each other. Shelby coughed politely into her hand and ambled over to a grassy spot near the lock. She sat down and focused on the black water. The land seemed to yawn beneath her, breathing in her essence and blowing the force through her. A shiver and a nod of the head left Shelby feeling somewhat different, like the effects of valerian tincture setting in. She closed her eyes. A hiss crackled around her head, making her jump to her feet with a start. She searched the ground for a snake. There wasn't one. Feeling foolish, she rejoined the group, noting with relief that no one seemed to have taken notice. Rose suddenly grabbed Shelby by the arm. "Did you know Shelby raises goats?" Rose asked Cian. Everyone looked at Shelby, who felt nervous under the sudden attention. If anyone would have asked Shelby how she had come to raise goats, she would have shrugged and said, "Oh, it was one of those things. One day she was at home, a friend dropped by and said, 'Baby goats.' And the next thing she knew, she had 2 kids, a male and a female, and was on her way to having a goat farm." That was the short and simple of it, which was how her whole life had been up to that point. It actually was also a mere reflection of her, short and simple, a post-flower child, still wandering aimlessly through life looking for utopia. No one commented on Rose's announcement. Shelby met Ken's blue eyes. He smiled and winked. She sensed that the attention he gave her was just a game, but returned his smile just the same, then glanced at Cian. He was leaning against his staff, wearing a cocky smile, his eyes intently focusing on Vivian coming up the path. Though Shelby wasn't sure whether she preferred men or women, she still found some men attractive. She found Cian a tiny bit attractive. No chance there, though. He only had eyes for Vivian. Oh, sure, he flirted with all the women in the group. He was, after all, a womanizer, but It was harmless flirting, fun and playful. Kian simply knew how to make women feel good, and that to Shelby was a rare gift. Kian intentionally did not speak, but waited for Vivian to stop in front of him. She had already noticed the mend in the wire fence. Three's a charm in most cases, but here this third sign of blockage, non-admission, reading go away, or at least stop, was not seen as a positive. Rather, it rattled nerves and made everyone sit up and take notice. Vivian went to the fence and tentatively touched the new wire, then jerked her hand back as if an electrical shock surged through her. She chewed on her bottom lip, looked beyond the fence up the path, and then back down the path they had all just walked. Hadn't they passed someone en route? A woman, yes. She searched her mind for a cognizant thread of certainty. No one had mentioned a woman. Thinking better of it, she let the thought go and looked out to the loch. Gerald's isle sat in the black waters, the topmost branches of the tree of trees a deep green. No swans swam on the lake. Black water. Images from An American Werewolf in London danced to life. Maybe she even said those words. If so, no one grabbed onto the concept and exploited it, which was usually the norm for this group. Even Steve, loudmouthed, self-centered, totally unconscious, post-Little Fort, Lord Fauntleroy, Steve was dead quiet. His eyes were glued to her face, watching her every move. The area seemed so still, so quiet that Vivian had the uncanny desire to remind everyone to breathe. They were unwanted, though. Vivian felt sure of that now. With her back to the group, she finally spoke. Well, okay, everyone, back to the lawn area. I could help lift Donna over the fence, suggested Kian, attempting to second guess her thoughts. No thanks, said Donna. Nope, Vivian said, smiling at Donna. We're unwanted. This is Badland. No, they're afraid of us. We're unwanted. We're too powerful for them. Competition for the darkness here. Nope. I promised Onya we wouldn't work the land here, and I'm keeping my promise. No ceremony here, right? She turned and faced Kian, her eyes challenging him to defy her decision. Kian's eye held a tinge of darkness in them, a reflection of the watchers. They brought a chill to Vivian's heart, and this awareness scared Vivian more than anything they had yet encountered. Besides, she mumbled, I don't feel good here. A gust of wind rushed over the water, whipping through the trees, bending grass and stalks, lifting hair askew. As if the group felt a silent gratefulness, everyone sighed in relief, turned, and began moving back the way they'd come, following Kian's lead. No questions were asked. Total obedience was exemplified. Vivian lingered at the fence, motioning Carla that she should go with the group. She watched as they moved out of sight before removing the pack from her back. She lowered it to the ground and squatted beside it, rummaging through the bag for some chocolate, and as she did, a new fear crept up her back. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. The presence felt ominous, wrong, and she suddenly felt tainted, if that was the right word, tainted, turned black, molded by some unseen force, and dwarfed into a meaningless fragment of consciousness. The look in Kian's eyes haunted her. She cringed at the thought that it was a look intentionally directed at her, and that all the emotion she had seen registered in those brown eyes had clearly been mistaken, that she had somehow misread him all along, and that he did not hold one little significant feeling for her. How could she have been so wrong? How could he look so coldly upon her, almost as if he hated her, as if the mere sight of her repulsed him? An endless string of questions plagued her mind, poured from her with every breath as if she were a faucet that could not be turned off. She gushed with questions, wanting badly, no, desperately needing to scream them to the lake, the trees, the hill rising above her, to demand answers. She was willing to throw a full-blown tantrum in order to get the answers she needed if she was going to retain a hold on sanity. All the innuendos of the fantasy she had toyed with seemed vulgar, made her the butt of all jokes. And this thought could not be tolerated, could not be accepted, simply could not exist. Finding a piece of chocolate, she pulled it from the pack, rose and threw it over the fence in anger. "This is for you," she hissed. "Even though you're trying to keep us out because you're afraid of us, accept this offering, beings of darkness." She made the offering and froze. How in the world could she make an offering to beings she felt were evil? This was senseless. All of this senseless. She squatted again and shoved her hand back into the pouch, pulling out a candy bar. Just as hastily, she removed the wrapper, stuffed the paper back in the bag, zipped it up, and slipped her arms through the straps, hoisting it back onto her back. Turning, Vivian faced the lock, holding the candy in her hands. Her green eye glared at the dark water, at the wind-beaten island out in the middle of the water, and then up to the black specks circling in the sky over the grove. She knew the candy was still in her hand, and she threw it toward the lock, lowering her eyes to see where the chocolate landed. "Here, take this, evil ones, even though you don't deserve an offering. Know that the light workers are better than you are. We're not afraid of you. Maybe we'll come back when you elevate your energy to match ours, and when you deserve to have us work the land here." Another gust of wind seemed to growl around her. Vivian shivered and glanced nervously around. Something shoved her from behind, and without turning to see what it was, Vivian ran until she caught sight of the others. Okay. That was interesting. Okay. Well, that's the first chapter for today, for our session today. And as I mentioned last week, this week is going to be interesting. And the apex of the dark challenge that they all experience. I think I'm going to take us down to the water's edge. I love the expansiveness of the ocean. That's my little homestead right there. The mountains, hills beyond. It's so pretty here. I just love it. Okay. Here's where I'm going to read from. Continuing forward on page 230. Legions. Faery Chronicle entry 2.222.3. A plush green lawn spread between the loch and the parking lot adjacent to steps leading up to the closed interpretive centre and museum. An imaginative reconstruction of two of the Neolithic house types of the area, white stone walls, wood beams that supported conical shaped thatched roofs. In early historic times, the chief people of the area had been known as the Éireann, the Ogonacht, a more powerful sect who ruled the province of Munster until the middle of the 10th century, eventually superseded the Éireann. The Ogonacht Anya Cleoch was a branch of the parent Seth, believed to have come into power in the 5th century. They had their headquarters at Knockony, southeast of Lochgar. The scholars of the day believed that the Ogonacht Anya Cleoch owed their rapid rise to their successful raids on Roman Britain, and perhaps also to their early adoption of Christianity. Their mythological tradition centered on Knock-Onya and on the goddess Onya herself, a tradition rich with many legends connected with the hill and its vicinity. As all things must fade or must surrender to change, before the end of the 10th century, the Ogonacht supremacy in Munster passed away, and the Dalcas, of whom Brian Boru was the most distinguished member, were in the ascendant. Lochgar was not only an area of national interest, but an area known for its local tourism. It was regularly frequented, as was attested to by the white metal picnic tables randomly placed on the green lawn, providing favourable views of the surrounding area on days when the sky was blue and wide overhead. On days that were bright with sunshine and warmth, the water seemed inviting. On days like that, all of Ireland came awake, the people, the animals, the birds, and the things that lay normally hidden. And on days like that, the sky over Lochgard was indeed wide, a concave bowl of brilliant blue soup that reflected the depths of the loch in it, or so it seemed if one lay on their back on the plush carpet of green and scraped the heavens above for very long. But not on this day. In this sky over Lochgar, today was ugly and black, tormented with angry thunderheads and violent winds that stretched trees and stalks to their limit. Today it threatened to burst forth its foul mood upon any sorry fool who came to the loch shore. Today it reflected a sinister presence. Today it reflected our enemy, dark powers of the unseelie court. The forming embryo, snuggled deep inside of Carla's womb, burped. Her hands immediately covered the place where she felt the sudden popping. Carla had no clue that the embryo had only burped, thinking that it must be big enough now to stretch its nubby arms or nubby legs, that it had just punched or kicked her. A naive smile curved her lips that had been forming into a frown, causing wrinkles to prune the skin around them. Joe had long since departed with the van, and it had been over an hour since they found out that nothing was open to them, not even Knockadoon. Vivian grabbed the opportunity to meet with Marcella, and so those two had ambled off. Marcella, in the lead, had led Vivian back up the path to a little grassy area just south of where the path disappeared into the forest. There they now sat, Vivian facing the loch and Marcella with her back to Carla. Behind Vivian, Knockadoon rose like a fortress, its side covered with elms and ashes crowding together and briars clinging to the cliffs. Carla did not see the ruin of Brokir's castle. Between where she was and where the two women sat lay a portion of the loch, pooling into a marshy area nearing the path. Cattails and meadowsweet rose up in clusters at the edge of the marsh. Just offshore was a lake dwelling called a crannog. It consisted of a pile of stones on an islet joined to the lake by a strip of marsh. Originally, it had been a tiny island. Carla lifted her attention to the black sky. It was funny how she couldn't wait to revisit Loch Gur, the horseshoe-shaped lake around whose shores a great number of largely prehistoric monuments remained. Now she couldn't wait to leave, although she wasn't sure if such sentiment was only an echo of Vivian's or her own. These days, Carla just wasn't sure where she ended and Vivian began. Take, for example, the whole business about Fotla and Bonva. Carla just wasn't sure she really understood any of it. I mean, she pretended to be convinced she was Fotla and Vivian was Bonva. She had even told Vivian she believed this pilgrimage was all about them undergoing an awakening and making this connection, but she didn't have a clue what awakening really meant. Carla listened dumbfounded when Vivian explained that if it was true, and they had awakened into immortality, remembering who they had been in a distant age, then they were undergoing some type of enlightenment. This meant it was important for them to perceive or realize that they would continue forward, that they had been given the great gifts of knowing, that even after this life they would again be able to reawaken in the following life, that by remembering Fotla and Bonva, they kept themselves alive, they kept the fairy alive, which meant they were participating in a process Vivian called awakened immortality. In this knowing, Vivian whispered, her eyes a deeper, more serious shade of green, comes the deep inner peace that most people search a lifetime for and never find. Vivian had given her the most angelic smile then, and Carla instantly knew. She didn't have a clue what Vivian was talking about, or what Vivian was experiencing, or what Vivian understood. She pulled a strand of hair free and twisted it around her finger until it pulled so tight on her scalp that it hurt. She twisted tighter, causing tears to come to her eyes, hoping that she could wake herself up from the abyss of lies she was tumbling deeper into. A maze of lies that meandered around her like the pathway above the interpretive center. She studied the pathway as it meandered through an adjoining field system to where the foundations joined together to look like spectacles on the hillside. Kian, Steve, Mark, Shelby, and Donna stood on a ledge above the spectacles, providing a bird's eye view of the area. The four pilgrims chattered amongst themselves, with Kian giving an occasional nod to let them know he was listening, or offering a smile now and then as a response. He held his gaze steadily on Vivian. Kian was angry. He didn't like the energy here any more than she did, but that's not what was bothering him. It was those damn poems. His fingers found the cigarette tin, popped it open, and snatched out a fag. As if this were a sign of consent, Steve pulled out a fresh stogie, and Rose lit up. Shelby and Donna moved a short distance away from the smokers and fell into a private conversation. Kian held the cigarette between his lips and took a long drag, becoming attentive to Shelby's words. "I thought it was a snake," Shelby said to Donna. "Wait, a hiss like a snake or the buzzing of flies?" Kian interrupted, pulling the cigarette from his mouth and flicking the ashes. "Well, like thousands of flies," Mark said, distracted by his own thoughts. His black eyes focused on the lock below. The others studied him. "What's that you say?" Kian asked, unaccustomed to the man speaking. Mark blinked, looking up. He shook his head. Flies. I thought a swarm of flies were coming at us down there." They followed his gaze down to the lock, down to where the gate stood, to the place where just then Ellen and Ken were climbing over. "What the hell are they doing?" questioned Kian. What the hell? There was no way Ken was going to be stopped from going out on Knockadoon because the hole in the fence had been repaired and somebody couldn't climb over it. What was just amazing to him was how one bad apple could always spoil the lot. As for Vivian's concern, well, he and Ellen weren't going to do any ceremony, so he figured no harm would be done if they hiked around. Besides, Vivian hadn't stopped them when they walked past her and Marcella. She hadn't even returned their wave. Certainly, she would have stopped them if she didn't want them to go on Knockadoon. Ken helped Ellen over the fence and grinned at her. "Let's go exploring, darling," he said. "Which way?" asked Ellen, a determined look in her eyes. "Follow me," he whispered. The two set off, tromping through the underbrush. They cautiously made their way between the trees and up the cliffside, coming out on top of the hill. They took in the panoramic view of the area. It was breathtaking. "They don't know what they're missing," Ken huffed, out of breath. "Didn't Vivian say there was a cave up here?" asked Ellen. Ken nodded. "Let's see if we can find it," she encouraged. "Yeah," he mused. "I think I saw something near the cliff a little ways back." "Do you want to see if that's what it is?" she asked. With a wink of his eye, Ken turned and moved back the way they had come. 20 feet below, they veered to the right. The hillside flattened out onto a small shelf, surrounded on 3 sides by brambles. "I think it's right down here," he said, stopping beneath an overhang, the foliage swallowing him. When he suddenly stopped, Ellen smacked into his back. "Oof, Ken!" she exclaimed, trying to peer over his shoulder. "Oh, my God! What is that smell? And what's that sound?" The mouth of the cave was hidden behind a cascade of blackthorn, which could, with little effort, be pushed back. A swarm of large black flies clung to the thorn bush. "No way! I'm not going in there," Ken stated, the disgust visible on his face. "Well, why do you think the flies are here?" Ellen asked, tentatively, edging herself into a better position. "Well, do you think that that's the cave?" she asked, looking over her shoulder. "Of course it's the cave. We found it," he said somewhat proudly. "Didn't Vivian and Kian say they'd looked for it but never found it?" "Ellen, move!" Ken did not like the feeling in the pit of his stomach, and the smell didn't help. "I need air," he demanded. "God, what is that smell? Ellen! What? Ellen! Ken stressed, becoming frantic and pushing her with both hands. Move! Legions stirred, seeping out from the cave. Hundreds of black flies lifted into the air. Ellen gasped. She turned and fled past Ken, who turned back to the cave. Legions oozed forth, stretching a shadowy finger toward Ken, slipping closer and closer. Ken shivered. Someone's just walked over my grave, he mumbled, drawing his shoulders up around his ears, eyes wide and frightened, sensing that something was horribly wrong, wishing in that fleeting second that he had listened to Vivian's warnings. Something was wrong, and Ken had stepped right into it. This wasn't the same as what he'd felt in the cairn at Loch Crew. No, this was horrible, and his mind fought the horrid pictures that sprang to life. Evil, ugly pictures of beady red eyes and white fangs and blood. Come on, Ken! Ellen's sharp, shrill voice sounded, but Ken couldn't move. He couldn't move even his smallest finger or open his mouth to reply. Even his tongue felt solid and thick, frozen. Black flies swarmed around him, flitting from his cheeks to his eyelids to his ears. He could feel their prickly legs on his skin, moving into his hair, blocking the openings of his nostrils. The panic grew with such force that Kim was sure he was wetting himself, and was finally able to move and look down at his crotch. Don't look up! Don't look up! He heard himself whimpering. Not sure if he was actually speaking or if the words lived only in his mind, but to look up meant to see what was standing in the mouth of the cave. Suddenly, there came the stench of rotting flesh. Ken gagged, bent over, and threw up. With hands anchored against his knees, he retched again, listening as the sound of wrestling grew stronger and closer, and a shadow fell over him. He clamped his eyes shut, willing himself to move, begging himself to move, but he couldn't. Oh, God, he couldn't. He gasped for air, tears springing to his eyes, and he felt the movement on the top of his head, felt something flowing over his back, felt as if he was being consumed within a thick fog of putrid energy. Something was horribly wrong. A wail rose in the pit of his stomach, pushing the remains of his morning breakfast down his throat and out through his gaping mouth. A second time he spewed and watched horrified as the mass of half-digested food was instantly covered by black flies. The distant honk of a horn broke through Ken's hysteria. He turned and fled, a dark spot imprinted on his aura. Briars ripped at his trailing coat. He threw his arms up to cover his face and crashed through a thicket of branches. Ellen gawked at the sight of him rushing to his side. "Oh my God, Ken, are you all right?" She pulled twigs and leaves from his blonde hair and smoothed it back into place. Ken swatted her hands away, angry that she should see his weakness once again. "I'm fine," he snarled, his eyes dark and threatening. "Leave me alone." Ellen staggered back. What happened?" she asked quietly. Ken's eyes bit into Helen's face. He spat and wiped his mouth with a corner of his coat. "Nothing," he growled. Ellen came to him and placed her hand on the side of his face. "Another episode, dear?" she asked, using their term for his anxiety attacks. "Yeah, that's it," he lied, refusing to believe what had just happened. "It's going to be okay," she cooed, wrapping her arms around him and patting his back as if he were a little boy. "Just get a hold of yourself," she instructed, as she always did. falling into the pattern. Take a deep breath, dear, pausing to feel his chest and back expand. That's it. Now let it out slowly, slowly. She listened to the evenness of his exhale. That's good, dear. She pulled back so she could see his face. Better? Ken nodded and let out another breath loudly. The honk of a horn sounded again. They both jumped. Do you suppose that might be Joe? Ellen asked hopefully. Probably, answered Ken, running a hand over the top of his hair. Ellen took Ken's other hand and turned. Ken followed. Will not say anything of this matter, Ellen informed Ken over her shoulder as she led him down the hill. Well, so as those of you listening to the narration have come to understand, I believe, all of this is based on a real life sacred pilgrimage to Ireland. Ken and Ellen are indeed two real people, though they're fictionalized and have given different names, etc., etc. They described that experience to me that evening. They pulled me aside and they described it. Scary. They were both very, very shaken. Life is stranger than fiction. Indeed it is. Okay, so I think I have time to read the next chapter, but let me double check. I don't remember how long it is. Yeah, I do. I can read this next chapter, and then that'll be all for today. Page 238. An imprint. Sean McDowell sat on a bar stool in Riley's pub. A fresh pint of Guinness sat before him. 3 other men cloistered around the bar. 2 had been there since shortly after John unlocked the door. The other one walked in after himself. They all knew one another, had bid each other a fine day, before turning his attention to his drink. None of them were in the mood for talk. He figured he'd have another hour to wait on his hands before she and her group arrived. From where he was sitting, he could see down the lane leading to the loch out a back window. There were 2 things that bothered Joe, actually 3, though the third one was separate from the first 2. He couldn't quite figure out how the tires had gone flat and why the engine had died. What he had not told anyone the day before was that no cause had been found for the flat tires, no nails or glass or splits or holes in the rubber tubing. Yet both tires had gone flat, following what sounded like a blowout. He couldn't figure out what had happened. Not only that, but the engine had kicked over the first turn of the ignition that morning when Tommy, the mechanic, sat behind the wheel. Now that really bothered Joe. After spending an hour and a half with the mechanic, neither of them could find anything wrong with the engine. Not the fuel pumps, nor the carburetor, or the plugs, the battery, you name it. It was checked out and no problem found. The memory of their last visit to the area crept up, the vandal and the stolen hubcaps. Joe thought of Sean McDowell and what Vivian said last night. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was a conspiracy going on. That gave him the heebie-jeebies. He'd tell you that much for nothing. He didn't know what to make of it, but one thing was certain. Loch Gur didn't want them, which was the third thing bothering him. Magic. The fairy. Goddesses. Whatever it was that Vivian and Cian really did was real, and a world unknown to him, one with which he was now intrigued. But how he wished they'd leave Loch Gur out of the next tour. He'd have himself a talk with Vivian. She was pretty reasonable, although she could get pretty crazy. Joe laughed to himself and unconsciously patted his shirt pocket, suddenly wishing he had not given up smoking last Christmas. He guided the bus past the pub, throwing it a silent curse, and turned onto the lane leading to the interpretive center. Sean McDowell sat up. An hour and 2 Guinnesses later, the empty white bus had finally turned down the lane. He watched its taillights flash briefly as it slowed to round the curve. He afforded himself a smile. It was only a matter of minutes before it would return full. He lifted the glass to his lips and took a long fill of his drink. The sensation of falling swept through Carla's body. She jerked her eyes open and looked around. An eerie shadow hung over the Nakadung cliff. Vivian and Marcella were talking across the parking lot, but still walking toward her. Steve's laughter made her turn around. He and Mark were sitting on the curb directly behind her. They acknowledged her with a smile and a nod. She jumped at the sound of the bus horn, but was pleased to know Joe was back, and with him their old bus. Steve cheered, sticking his thumb in the air. Carla, relieved, yawned and stretched, gathered together her belongings and stood. The sudden commotion, nobody paid much attention to Ken and Ellen as they rejoined the group and boarded the bus. They quietly took their usual seats. Cian and Vivian were the last to climb aboard. Vivian stayed standing at the head of the bus, facing them, a huge smile on her face. Joe leaned against the driver's seat, arms folded across his chest, legs crossed at the ankles, an equally large smile on his face. Cian looped an arm around Joe's neck, pretending to get him in a neck hold. He thumped him on the head. "You rascal," Cian said playfully, to which Joe beamed even more. "Okay, folks," Vivian said, "let's go get some lunch. Let's get out of here." A cheer of support sounded. Joe slipped into his seat and started the engine. Cian and Vivian sat down in opposite seats. Their eyes met. Both showed signs of relief. The bus bumped down the road, the inside a ruckus of laughter. Farther down the lane, Joe expertly guided the bus around the corner, passing the Loch Gur Inn on the right. A chorus of boos, initiated by Ken, rippled through the bus. "That's where we were going to have lunch and dinner, but I don't think so," said Carla caustically. Vivian turned in her seat to watch the inn disappear as the bus left it in the dust. Sean McDowell gritted his teeth, watched the bus head out of Loch Gur. He slammed a fist on the bar and lowered his head to his hands. He left the bar and stood out front beside his car, staring down the empty road. The scent of something got his nostrils as a gust of wind whipped around him. The lock drew his attention. He turned his head and peered down the lane. Ah! Legions had been roused from the cave. He turned his head and peered back down the empty road, which meant someone in that bus was tainted. A nefarious grin edged his lips. All was not lost. He could draw them back through Legion's imprint. He laughed. Ha ha! This is going to be easy. Well, all right. There you have it. That's the end of today's narration. Thank you for coming and joining me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being interested in my writing. And yeah. I'll see you next week. Same time, same station. Until then, my friends, take care and have a great rest of your day. Bye for now.